As soon as Ms. Granger walked into the classroom, I knew something was wrong. Her eyes were different, cold and calculating, like the eyes of a predator sizing up its prey. I tried to ignore the feeling of unease that crept over me and focus on the lesson, but it was hard. As the class went on, things only got worse. Ms. Granger started berating students for small mistakes and seemed to take pleasure in making us feel small. I noticed that her hands were shaking slightly and that her skin was flushed. It was like she was fighting something inside of her. By the end of class, I was convinced that something was seriously wrong with Ms. Granger. I tried to talk to my friends about it, but they just shrugged it off. "She's always been strict," one of them said. "You're just being paranoid." I didn't want to be paranoid, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Ms. Granger was a monster. The next day, I decided to stay after class and confront her. I told her that I was worried about her and asked if she needed help. Ms. Granger's reaction was swift and violent. She slammed the door shut and pinned me against the wall. Her eyes had turned completely black, and her teeth had grown into fangs. I tried to scream, but she clamped a hand over my mouth. "No one will believe you," she hissed. "I'll make sure of that." She let me go, and I stumbled out of the classroom, shaking and in shock. I tried to tell the principal what had happened, but he just looked at me with a mixture of pity and disbelief. "Ms. Granger is a fine teacher," he said. "You must have misunderstood." But I hadn't misunderstood. I knew what I had seen, and I knew that Ms. Granger was a monster. I just didn't know how to prove it to anyone else. Over the next few weeks, I tried to avoid Ms. Granger as much as possible, but every time I saw her, my heart would race and my hands would shake. I knew that she was watching me, waiting for me to slip up. One day, I decided that enough was enough. I gathered up all the evidence I could find, recordings of her lectures, testimonies from other students, and even pictures of her eyes turning black, and presented it to the principal. To my surprise, he actually listened this time. He called Ms. Granger into his office and confronted her with the evidence. At first, she denied everything, but as more and more students came forward with their own stories, she finally broke down and confessed. Ms. Granger was taken away, and the school was left in shock. How could we have been so blind to the monster in our midst? But for me, it was a relief. I had finally been vindicated, and I knew that I had saved countless students from the same fate.